that the Bush administration did not have a policy toward North Korea. It had hardliners, mainly run out of Cheney's office, who wanted to thwart any engagement with North Korea and had a policy of regime change, of overthrowing the government. And you had people in the State Department and elsewhere, the CIA, interested in engaging and talking to North Korea to get rid of their bomb program or programs. And the president did not step in, as far as I can tell, until this year to assert his responsibility to tell people to shut up and get a consensus policy on the table, get an agreed policy. And of course, we still don't know how he did that, but the evidence seems to suggest that Condoleezza Rice and Christopher Hill bypassed Cheney's office and a lot of the rest of the bureaucracy, meeting in Berlin with the North Korean lead negotiator, telephoning back from Berlin after Condoleezza Rice joined Christopher Hill, telephoning the Bush and getting his personal approval for an agreement. The agreement that came out on February 13th was fundamentally an agreement that Christopher Hill and Kim Guan-gye did in Berlin. And, I mean, just as a matter of record, Cheney always said, we don't talk to evil. Christopher Hill talked to evil. We don't reward bad behavior. These negotiations came really almost on the heels of the missile test and the atomic bomb test in October. No bilateral talks with North Korea. Well, unless they're in Berlin, then we'll have them. North Korea can't be trusted to keep its agreements. This was President Bush's first important statement on North Korea when Kim Dae-jung visited in March 2001. Well, I don't trust Kim Jong-il to keep his agreements. I looked at that and said to myself, who did? These agreements aren't built on trust, they're built on verification, on having inspectors on the ground, on all kinds of technological verification. It has nothing to do with trusting Kim Jong-il. If it did, there never would be an agreement. But all of those principles of the Bush administration that define its foreign policy, and unilateralism would be another because they went at North Korea through multilateralism, seem to have evaporated just in the last month or so. So I think you have to credit China with playing an enormous role here, both in first trying to get a forum in which the U.S. and North Korea would talk to each other. April 2003 was the first time three-way talks in Beijing. China was very worried that if the Iraq war went quickly to a conclusion, Washington would attack North Korea and do a preemptive strike. And they intervened to get talks going. Then those turned into six-party talks. But the fact is the six parties were there as a modality in Beijing to get the two parties talking, North Korea and the U.S. That's always been the case, and Mr. Hill more or less validated that in his bilateral meeting in Beijing. Dick Cheney, I think, is he's one of the few architects of what we know as the Bush foreign policy of unilateralism who is still in power after Bolton and a whole host of other people have left. I would be very skeptical that he's out of the loop. And one of the problems may be that this agreement would go down the pike a little bit and then problems would develop and Cheney would be able to argue, well, see, you can't negotiate with these people in Pyongyang. I don't think so, but it's a possibility. Anyway, my talk may sound partisan. This agreement is no better and in some ways worse than what we had in October 1994. It's back to the future. It doesn't talk about missiles, so we're not even back to 1999, we're back to 1994. But it's a good agreement, and the principles in it, including ending the Korean War, a group to talk about normalization of relations with North Korea, and of course, getting rid of North Korea's nuclear program. Those are principles that a task force on Korea policy recommended 4 years ago. I want to close by saying that, in my view, the most unproductive and unreasonable and even stupid policy that has come out of Washington in the last 5 years is to talk about world affairs in terms of good and evil. You may think the North Koreans are evil, but you have to have a policy for what to do about that. And those people in South Korea and elsewhere who have thought the North Koreans are evil have not had a policy that works in the past 62 years to get rid of that evil. But I think the most important lesson is one learned the hardest way possible by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his Gulag Archipelago, his famous multi-volume study of the Soviet concentration and work and prison camps, where he says, if only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being.